The river barely moved that winter. It lay frozen beneath its crust of snow, the same way grief settles under skin unseen, but sharp if pressed. Tossin sat alone at the edge of the tree line, where pine needles bled into drifts and wind carved its sorrow across the open earth. His horse stood behind him, steaming through the breath of silence, saddle blanket stiff with frost. He hadn't meant to come this far, only to check the trapline near the frozen bend. But the air had drawn him deeper, toward the place where the river curved like a sleeping child's back. That was where he saw her. At first he thought she was a branch. The body was curved like driftwood, half covered in white, one arm bent strangely beneath her, hair black against the snow like spilled ink. But there was breath. Faint. Ragged. Not enough to speak of, but just enough to keep her from vanishing entirely. She was barefoot. He dismounted without thought. His boots broke through the crust as he approached. The girl did not stir. Her face was purple at the edges, cracked at the lips. Her eyes had the faint glimmer of someone caught between one world and the next. He knelt beside her, slowly, as if afraid to frighten her back into death. No blood. No visible wounds. Just cold. And that look, the look of someone who had been running from something worse than winter. Tossin didn't speak. He simply pulled the blanket from his saddle. Worn. Soft. Fringed in turquoise thread. It had belonged to his wife. The last thing she touched before her belly tore and her silence swallowed the child inside her. He'd buried them both by the cottonwoods last spring. Since then, he hadn't touched the blanket. Until now. He wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. She flinched at first, barely a breath of movement, but didn't pull away. Her fingers, blue at the edges, clawed into the wool like it might lift her out of the snow. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. Her body already knew it had been given a second chance. He lifted her carefully. She weighed less than a bag of oats. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn at the hem and soaked through. Mud streaked her legs, one ankle twisted inward. No shoes. No satchel. No name. Just bones. And breath. The ride back to the barn was slow. He rode with her in front, wrapped tightly in his arms, her head against his chest. She never spoke. But once, when the wind shifted, he thought he felt her grip tighten at the sound of wolves somewhere distant. He didn't ask. He didn't want the answer yet. Back at the barn, the old structure groaned in the wind. He carried her inside past hayloft and lantern, past the saddle tools and the coiled ropes. The warmth from the coals was barely enough, but it would do. He laid her gently in the corner, near the fire pit lined with stones. The blanket stayed around her. He piled extra pelts at her sides, stoked the fire until the air cracked with dry heat. Still she did not wake. But her fingers curled it slow as spring thaw, and her mouth moved. No sound. Just shape. Tossin sat beside her, back to the wall, boots outstretched toward the flames. He did not speak. He did not pray. But his hand drifted to the place at his side where his knife used to be. Old habits. And grief was never far from his fingers. He watched her all night. When the lantern sputtered, he trimmed it. When the fire fell low, he fed it. The horses shifted restlessly in their stalls, and somewhere beyond the trees, the night cracked with frozen branches breaking under snow. But inside, it was quiet. Just breathing, uneven and raw, and the steady thrum of time passing like a heartbeat outside the body. Morning came slowly, as it always did in winter. First the cold light, then the sound of wind turning. And then the shadows. Tossin saw them through the cracks in the wood. Long shapes. Mounted figures, rows upon rows, not moving. Just standing. He opened the barn door slowly. The snow had flattened under hooves. 700 warriors, mounted and silent, lined the edge of the woods and spilled into the meadow beyond. Not shouting. Not threatening. Just watching. Most wore feathers. Some had paint. All carried weapons. Tarzan didn't reach for his own. He stepped out barefoot, arms loose at his sides, coat unbuttoned. The cold sank instantly into his skin, but he didn't flinch. He looked past them all, toward the one figure at the center, older, tall, face painted in white ash, braided hair draped in bone beads. No one spoke. Then, slowly, the man raised one hand. It was a gesture not of war, but of witness. Behind him, the girl stirred. Inside the barn, Isla opened her eyes for the first time. They were the eyes of someone who had died and come back, not whole, not ready, but breathing. And in that breath, something old and quiet passed between her and the land. She sat up, and the blanket slipped from her shoulders to her waist. She looked toward the door, not surprised, not afraid. Her gaze went through the wood, through the snow, through the line of warriors beyond. And then, she looked at him. At the man who had given her the only warmth he had left. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. He had seen death before. But never like this. Never where it came back carrying something more than sorrow. Tarzan stepped back inside and closed the barn door behind him. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask why they had come. Some questions arrived too early to bear their answers. But he knew one thing. She had not been alone in her suffering. And now, neither was he. The wind outside shifted. It was not softer. But it no longer felt like morning. The girl had not spoken by the time the second night fell. She moved like someone trying not to be seen by her own shadow, quiet, half-curled into herself, eyes too still. The blanket never left her shoulders. She clutched it with a strange reverence, fingers buried deep in the weave, as if it might slip through her grasp and take her with it. Tarzan said little. He wasn't a man of many words even in better times. After the burial of his wife, he had spoken only to his horse for near a year. Still, something about her silence felt heavier than his own. It wasn't just pain. It was shame. A kind that wrapped tighter than the cold ever had. By the firelight, she looked older than she was. The frostbite had faded from her face, but left behind a bluish hue at the tips of her ears and toes. Her feet, raw and cracked, he had wrapped in cloth. She had flinched, but not from the pain. From the mercy. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Not when she drank the hot broth he set beside her. Not when she tried to stand, faltered, and sank back onto the straw-lined floor. Not even when the horses nickered and Tarzan turned sharply, hand at the hatchet by the door, then glanced at her for assurance as if to say, "Are they yours or mine?" Still nothing. He didn't press her. Instead, he let the small tasks fill the silence. He carried water from the creek. Chopped wood from the old cedar by the slope. Repaired the edge of his flint blade where the stone had cracked. She watched sometimes from the straw pile, hooded eyes following the rhythm of his movements. Never blinking long. On the fourth morning, he found the fire already burning when he woke. The girl sat near it, back straight, feeding it small slivers of wood she'd broken herself. She didn't look at him. But the act itself said enough. He gave a single nod. That day, she tried to stand again. He brought her a stick to lean on, a broken rake handle, sanded smooth at the grip. She took it in silence and rose with grit clenched in her teeth. The pain etched across her brow, but she didn't cry out. She limped to the horse stall, placed a hand on the gate, and just stood there. The mare snorted softly, uncertain. The girl, he still didn't know her name, reached out and touched the horse's flank. The mare didn't flinch. Later, when she collapsed by the fire and closed her eyes in a sheen of sweat, Tarzan poured a cup of water and held it out. She took it without hesitation now. Their silence had changed shape, less like distance, more like understanding. When dusk painted the sky in dying embers, he found her outside. She had crawled to the snow-packed trough to watch the moonrise. He brought her a fur to lay over her legs. She didn't thank him. But she pulled it tight and didn't let go. That night, while she slept, he heard her whisper something, half in dream, half in prayer. A single word. Coolly. He didn't ask. But the word stayed with him, echoing through the beams of the barn, curling between the horse's breath and the creak of the rafters. By morning, she was gone from the straw. Panic did not suit him. But it rose sharp when he saw the barn door cracked open. He stepped outside barefoot, tracking her prints, shallow, stumbling, half-circle drags through the snow. They led to the edge of the ridge where the trees broke, where the river bent out of sight. He found her kneeling, one hand on the frozen ground, the other reaching towards something that wasn't there. Her back shook, but she made no sound. He crouched beside her. Said nothing. After a while, she spoke without turning her face. Her voice was hoarse, like it had been forgotten too long. I didn't cry when they came. He didn't interrupt. I didn't cry when they burned the lodges, or when they put my mother in the wagon. I didn't even cry when they took my sister from my arms. Just held her like this, her fingers curled midair, trembling, and when they pulled, she let go. The wind caught her hair, scattering it across her face like black river reeds. I was too proud. Too still. I thought I could bring her back. That if I didn't cry, she wouldn't be scared. She turned to him then. Her eyes weren't full of tears. They were empty. I dropped her in the snow when I ran. I think she stopped crying before I let go. The words struck deeper than any arrow. Tarzan reached into his coat. From the inner fold, he drew out a strip of pine bark. On it, a half-carved pattern. A child's cradleboard, not finished. The wood was soft, smooth at the edges. He offered it to her, wordless. She looked at it a long time. Then took it in her palms like a sacred thing. When they returned to the barn, she hung it from the rafters above where she slept. She did not ask who had made it. That night, she asked for his name. He told her. Tarzan. She repeated it slowly, like tasting it on her tongue. When he asked for hers, she hesitated. Then, Isla. He waited for meaning. It means painted stone, she added softly. Because my mother said my soul never cracked. Not even when I should have broken. He said nothing. But that night, when he added wood to the fire, he laid the last piece with care, like a vow. In the quiet that followed, Isla hummed something soft. A lullaby. His breath caught. It was the same song his wife had sung to the unborn child. He hadn't heard it in years. Not even in dreams. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were closed, and she rocked slightly, cradling the pine board against her stomach. When the fire dipped low and the barn fell silent again, he didn't sleep. He watched the shadows stretch long across the beams, and thought about the weight a woman could carry without falling. He wondered how many would come looking for her. He wondered if they already had. And in the silence, he felt something shift. Not like love, not yet. But like frost beginning to loosen its grip on the earth. When morning came, Isla was the one who rose first. She stirred the fire, checked the horses, moved with purpose. Tarzan watched her walk from stall to stall, gently laying her palm on each flank. When she reached the mare she'd touched days before, she paused. She turned to him with a thin smile. I named her Cully, she said. He nodded once. In that moment, the barn didn't feel like a place where lost things went to die. It felt like the first breath of spring. Not yet warm. But promised. And far out beyond the trees, something stirred. Something neither of them could see, but both of them could feel. The barn's walls had begun to whisper. Not with voices, but with glances from outside, eyes behind curtains, horses that spooked too easily, children warned not to walk that far east. Word travels differently in the west, curling like chimney smoke. It doesn't shout. It waits for the right wind. Tarzan noticed it first when the bread deliveries stopped. The boy who used to bring oats and jerky from town no longer came. No rider crossed the ridge, no boot prints in the frost-lined path. Even the postmaster's dog, who once barked joyfully at passing riders, now only growled at shadows. One morning, Nantan arrived. He came without warning, the way elders often did on a mule, wrapped in a quilted coat that smelled of sage and pine smoke. His face was wind-worn, a map of years, and his eyes, always patient, held something colder than the weather. He didn't dismount. "You've built a shelter of bones," Nantan said. "But bones don't keep the cold out." Tossin leaned on his post. He didn't answer. "She's not yours to mend. She belongs to grief, and grief doesn't let go easy." "She breathes," Tossin replied softly. "So did your wife," Nantan said, his voice not cruel but bare. "Until she didn't." Tossin said nothing more. The mule turned slowly, hoofprints marking the snow like punctuation. Isola had heard it all from inside. That night, she asked what Nantan meant by shelter of bones. "It means I hold on too long," Tossin answered, staring into the fire. "And I've always tried to fix what only spirit can mend." Isola nodded once, then returned to her carving. She had taken up the habit of shaping small figures from bark and driftwood, mostly birds, horses, and once, a curled sleeping child. She didn't say what she did with them after. He found one buried under straw. Another floating in the trough. By the end of the week, 2 elders came. Not warriors. Not judges. Just old men with the smell of counsel on them. They sat outside the barn without knocking, as if their presence was permission enough. Tossin stepped out and waited. One held a small pouch of tobacco. The other a carved pipe. They said nothing for a long while. Finally, the pipe was lit. "She sings," one elder murmured. "We heard it through the trees." "Not for us," said the other. "No," Tossin agreed. "She sings for the ones she lost." A beat of silence passed. Some think she shouldn't still be singing. The words hung in the air, not accusation but observation. "She was left for dead," Tossin said. "I didn't bring her here to stir the town." "You didn't need to. The wind did that for you." Then, a pause. "Has she bled yet?" Tossin turned sharply. "She's not for that. We didn't say she was. But others think it." "Others," Tossin repeated. "There's judgment fires burning," said the elder with the pipe. "Not the kind that light homes. The kind that keep tongues warm in winter." They stood. "Choose wisely what warmth you want to feed," the first said. "A fire can either cook a meal or burn your roof." They left without another word. That night, Isola carved a new figure. A fox, this time. Tail curled, face alert. She set it on the mantel. When Tossin glanced at it, she said, "Foxes run when they must, but never in straight lines. They know the land better than hunters." The meaning was not lost on him. The next day, it happened. Tossin had ridden into town for flour and a horseshoe. He left Isola behind, with instructions to stay inside. She promised nothing, only nodded. But the moment he left, the wind shifted. She'd limped to the gate. The snow had crusted overnight, easier to walk across. The mare named Cully stood near the trough, blowing steam, and Isola approached with a slow, familiar rhythm. She hadn't touched the horse in days, not since the pain in her ankle had returned, but something in her needed motion. Needed contact. She was brushing down the mare's shoulder with a length of twine when it hit her. A stone. It struck her back with a dull thud. She didn't cry out. Another hit the barn wall beside her. When she turned, she saw 3 boys, no older than 15, standing near the tree line. One held a slingshot. Another had a scowl that trembled at the corners. The third didn't move. "Ghost woman," one of them shouted. "Why don't you sing for your tribe now?" The words struck harder than the stones. Not because of their hate, but because they had been taught, not invented. She stood still, hand on the horse. The mare snorted, unsettled. "I said sing," the boy screamed. She didn't. But she did something else. She hummed. Softly. A lullaby. The same one from nights before. It cut through the air with eerie calm. The boys stopped. One turned and ran. The second hesitated. The third, the one with the sling, took a step back but slipped on a patch of ice. His foot slid, and his body twisted sideways, crashing hard onto the earth. Isla said nothing. She limped to him, slowly, as if it cost her everything. The boy tried to scramble away, eyes wide. She knelt beside him. Held out her hand. He didn't take it. He ran. When Tarzan returned that evening, she was inside, the fire high, the horse calm, the fox still on the mantel. But her face was pale. Her eyes were hollowed out like she'd walked too long through someone else's storm. He didn't ask. But later, when he went to check the trough, he found a small cradleboard. Old, splintered, laid gently by the water. A single feather tied to its top. He knew the mark. It was from her people. He brought it inside. Set it beside the fox. She didn't ask how he found it. She only said, someone remembered. That night, neither of them slept. And by dawn, smoke rose from the trees beyond the ridge. Not from homes, but from fire pits. Judgment fires. 7 of them. Each from a different family line. Not an attack. Not a welcome. A signal. They were watching. And waiting. And Isla, wrapped again in the blanket that once belonged to Tarzan's wife, whispered, "I'm not ready to be seen. But I won't hide either." Tarzan nodded once. He stoked the fire and laid a flat stone inside. Upon it, he placed the fox, the cradleboard, and the piece of pine carved into a sleeping child. Outside, the wind moaned softly. But the barn held strong. The snow came heavier that week. Thick flakes drifted like ashes from the sky, settling on roofs and shoulders alike. It buried the judgment fires, softened the trails of boot prints, and covered up the tensions in the soil, but it did not erase them. The weight of waiting was still there, like a drumbeat just beneath the silence. Tarzan rose before the light, every morning now. He would walk the perimeter of the barn, shovel in hand, not for safety, but for ritual. He'd learned long ago that when you can't stop a thing, you prepare the earth beneath it. Inside, the barn had changed. Not visibly, but in feel. The hay was swept, the tools sharpened and placed neatly in rows, and the fire never went out. Isla tended to it even in sleep, one hand always near the coals. Her silence had softened into something else, not passivity, but presence. A kind of quiet that watched everything without needing to control it. She wore her hair differently now, pulled into 2 braids, wrapped in ribbon she'd found in the loft. The blanket remained her shawl, her armor. She had stitched new threads into its edge. Little red beads. Tarzan didn't ask where they came from. He simply noticed and respected it. He'd begun building again. A cradleboard, fully formed this time. Not from grief, but from something slower. Like healing, if it could be carved with a knife. On the 5th morning, the drums started. Distant, but steady. 1 beat, then pause. Then another. From deep within the trees past the river bend. Isla stopped what she was doing. Her whole body tensed. Tarzan met her eyes. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. They both knew what it meant. The Apache were coming again, not the 7 fires this time. All of them. By midday, the sound of hoofbeats rolled across the snow like thunder muffled in wool. Shapes moved through the tree-lean, rows of them, some mounted, some on foot, all cloaked against the cold. And they did not stop at the ridge this time. They came down into the meadow. Tarzan stood at the threshold of the barn, his axe unraised. His breath clouded in front of him. Isla stood behind him, not touching, not hiding. Just there. The blanket around her, braids down her chest, eyes forward. From the line of warriors, one woman broke off. She was old, wrapped in coyote furs, her face marked with lines that told more truth than any ledger. She approached slowly, leaning on a carved staff. When she reached the threshold, she looked past Tarzan. Her gaze landed on Isla and did not move. "You hum at night," she said. Isla swallowed. I remember what was sung to me. I don't sing it for them. I sing it for her." The woman nodded. "She was found curled by the frozen creek, a child clutched to her chest," she said softly. The child's lips were blue. Isla did not flinch. But her hands clenched the blanket tighter. "They blamed you," the woman went on. "Because grief is a coward's excuse for rage." She turned to Tossin then. "And you," she said, not unkindly, "wrap your dead wife's memory around another girl and call it shelter. But are you ready to see her as her own name?" Neither replied. "You don't have to answer now," she added. "We didn't come for vengeance." More figures joined her, women, children, one man carrying a pipe. They stood at a respectful distance. "We came to see if she could still stand. And if you would let her." Tossin stepped aside. The elder reached out. Not with hands, but with her eyes. Isla stepped forward, one barefoot heel leaving a dent in the snow. She walked until she stood just in front of the woman, then kneeled, not in surrender, but in respect. The elder knelt with her. They sat like that for a long time. Until the snow gathered in their hair. Then the elder rose. "She has walked through her fire," she said aloud to the group behind her. "And she did not burn. She warmed." With that, she turned and left. No one else spoke. They followed behind. But they didn't leave the field. They formed a circle. Not tight, but wide. Around the barn. 700 strong, in silence. And they began to drum again. Not in rhythm, but in heartbeat. Tossin turned to Isla. She was still kneeling in the snow. "You want to stay?" he asked gently. She nodded once. He offered her a hand. She took it. Together, they stepped back into the barn. Night came early. The circle outside did not move. Inside, Isla sat beside the fire and whispered, "I remember a time when all this would have frightened me." "And now?" he asked. "I feel seen." He nodded. "I thought I would be buried in silence," she added. "Instead, I'm alive in stillness." She reached into her coat and pulled something out. A small pouch of beadwork, loose, tattered. She opened it. Inside was a braid of baby hair. Black. Short. Tied with dried grass. "I didn't leave her behind," she whispered. "I carried her. Until she stopped being heavy." Tossin didn't speak. But he placed the cradleboard beside her. She stared at it, eyes full but unshed. "I thought no man would ever build something for me again," she said. "I didn't build it for you," he said. "I built it for the silence between us." She smiled. Outside, the snow kept falling. The drums slowed, then stopped. But the circle remained. And from somewhere near the fire's glow, a fox carved from pinewood toppled off its shelf. Neither of them moved to pick it up. It had fallen exactly where it needed to. And in that stillness, something new was born, not a vow, not a name, but the space where both could live. At dawn, the sky bled the faintest pink, like a bruise healing in reverse. Snow blanketed the world in a hush too complete for comfort. The circle of 700 warriors still held its shape, unmoved, unmoving. They were not there to attack. Not there to leave. They waited, as mountains wait, silent until something falls. Inside the barn, Isla stood for the first time without aid. Her feet were wrapped in new moccasins, hand-stitched from scraps Tossin had collected over the weeks. The red beads at the seams matched the thread she'd woven into the old blanket. Her hands shook as she fastened the last tie. She was not afraid. But there is a weight to walking into the gaze of the world when it once tried to forget you. Tossin watched her quietly. His own rifle hung on the wall untouched. The axe near the door leaned against a pile of split cedar. He had not prepared for war. He had prepared for a decision. When the first hooves approached, they both stepped outside. Together. Colonel Darrow's men were not subtle. They never had been. Blue uniforms against white snow, rifles slung low, eyes scanning as if the land owed them explanation. 5 riders in total. Darrow led them, a large man gone soft in the middle, with cruelty tucked under his tongue like tobacco. He did not greet. He announced, "You're harboring a fugitive, Apache." Tossin didn't answer. Snow crunched as he stepped forward, blocking Isola's body from Darrow's line of sight. "She murdered a settler child and escaped custody," Darrow said, louder now, as if that might push back 700 shadows that did not blink. "I have orders from the governor's own desk." From behind the tree line, a single drumbeat answered. Once. Then fell silent. Tossin's voice came low, but clear. "She did not murder a child. She carried her sister until the blood froze in her arms. Then she buried her. Alone." Darrow's face twisted. "You were not there." "But you weren't either," Tossin replied. Darrow signaled his men to dismount. The 4 soldiers hesitated. They looked toward the ring of warriors, then back at the barn. One of them, a younger one, not more than 20, took a half-step backward. Isola stepped out from behind Tossin. Darrow's eyes narrowed. "You." She met his stare. Her face did not tremble. The blanket hung from her shoulders like a crown now, not a shroud. "I am not yours to reclaim," she said. "You're not anyone's," he spat. She paused. Then said, softer, "No. I belong only to the memory of those who trusted me." Behind her, the snow shifted. From the ranks of the watching warriors, one stepped forward. It was the elder woman in the coyote furs. She carried nothing in her hands, no weapon, no staff. Only a cradleboard. She walked up beside Isola and placed it gently at her feet. "This," she said to Darrow, "is what she carries. Not your lies." Darrow's jaw clenched. "I will not be shamed by your dances and riddles." Tossin moved forward. "You will be." The air sharpened. The kind of stillness that holds lightning before it breaks. Darrow drew his pistol. He did not aim it. But it was enough. The warriors didn't shout. They didn't raise weapons. They did not need to. In the space between Darrow's heartbeat and the next breath, the sound of 700 arrows being notched cracked through the air like dry lightning. Darrow froze. Tossin stepped forward again, just one step, and stared down the man who once ordered fire set to Isola's village. "You drew first," he said calmly. "The land remembers." Darrow's horse snorted, nervous. One of his men disarmed him. The youngest one. They turned and left without a word. The ring of warriors did not lower their bows until the last hoofprint faded behind the trees. Then they melted into the woods. No fanfare. No farewell. Just snow swallowing their passage like a promise kept. Isola exhaled. Tossin bent to pick up the cradleboard. Its wood was warm somehow, though it had never touched flame. Later, they sat by the fire inside, neither speaking. The barn felt different, not emptied, not heavier. Just clearer. Like silence earned instead of endured. She looked at him finally. "I don't think I'll leave." "You don't have to," he said. "I may never be a wife," she added. "You already aren't alone." She nodded. Then leaned back against the wall, eyes half-lidded in peace. The flames danced, casting fox shadows along the rafters. Outside, the snow began to melt in the barest sunlight. And from that warmth, something took root. Not vengeance. Not justice. But a kind of grace that comes only after fire. A grace that could warm the West. Even if no one ever wrote it down. Even if the barn fell someday. Even if all that remained was a memory passed down in story, by those who sit close to the fire and speak softly. Sometimes, warmth is not given by those who shout. It's offered in the silence that stays. And those who have burned before know how to build the gentlest flames.